good. We are sitting here in Prince George on a podcast called Crazy Damn Canadians. And you, my friend, are a legend,
Yeah.
an absolute legend, not just in Prince George, but in this country. And I honestly couldn't sleep last night. I was so excited to have you on as a guest, and my mind was just racing with all of the subject matter and the discussions that we could explore. But why don't we just start off with introducing who you are, what you're passionate about, and what you've accomplished over the last few decades of calling Northern BC home.
Okay, well, I was born in Vancouver, 1950. Came up to Prince George in the early 1970s. I've been here ever since. And my story begins going camping with my parents when I was about 6 years old. We went to Cultus Lake. Back in those days, Cultus Lake was a lot different than what it is today. There were gravel roads. You could camp just about anywhere, and it was free. Stay as long as you wanted. And where my parents camped, I started wandering around on the roads nearby our campsite. And I was attracted to some of these very unusual plants, like the giant hollyhock was one. And later I discovered the vine maple, coast Douglas fern, all the other stuff that grows in the area. And at the same time, my dad, he loved his car radio. He loved just the sound it had and all that. He had his radio on much of the time, not blaring, but just loud enough to hear in our immediate campsite, with both doors open, tuned into C-Fun Vancouver. And I started listening to the music as a little 6-year-old. I discovered I could carry a song in the back of my head if I heard it a day later or a week later. And if I heard it a year later, I remember where and when I heard it for the same time. So Cultus Lake launched my two hobbies. And taking people around the campsite we went to Cultus Lake every year throughout the 50s, well into the early 60s. And I got to be known a little bit there, and I would go to some of the campsites, and I'd say, would you like a tour of some of the plants in the area? And some people said yes, and we had a set time. My parents tagged along, and the park ranger, he tagged along also. And I remember when I was little, I would ask the park ranger when he was making his rounds what kind of plant it is, and he always took a moment or two to stop and tell me what they were. And in later years, the shoe was on the other foot. He would come to me and ask, "What is this here?" And I would tell him. So I was about 9 or 10 at the time.
Absolutely outstanding. And you are an anomaly in terms of, from such a young age, finding out what your passion in life, or I should say passion, plural, because it's music and botany.
Yeah.
But there are few people, I would say less than 1% of human beings on planet Earth from a young age know exactly what it is they're meant to do on this planet for their life. And to find that passion and to continue pursuing it for your entire life is very rare. And you found that in music and botany.
And botany. And those early years were very, very difficult. I remember telling people, my parents, my mom and dad, and my teachers and that, what I wanted to do. And I was just about 6, 7, 8 years old, and nobody believed me. Nobody thought I was serious. I was labeled a dreamer, and I was told it's impossible, it's ridiculous. I mean, who would want to travel the country and collect all the native plants from every province and territory in Canada? And at the same time, I had a little battery-operated record player, and that was uncommon back then, that would play records in the back seat of a car. Every town and city I went through, I'd stop and buy a record as a memento of my visit to that town or city. I put the date on it. Back in those days, record stores were everywhere in Canada, whether it be a small prairie town or a large metro city. And I would make a journal of my trees and plants that I found that day. I would go through this town, and I sometimes would play the record in the parking lot, or I'd play it for the first time wherever I camped that night. And I have such wonderful, wonderful memories from being a very successful, a bit of a lonely life, though. I'm speaking of in my teen years into my early 20s, after I got my driver's license.
Did you realize at a young age that you had a gift? Did you just know that it was very uncommon for you as an individual to be able to listen to a song and have the lyrics memorized, and a year later be able to identify the origin of that song, the artist, the year is released, maybe the producers, and in addition to that, when it goes to the botanical side of things, to remember everything about plant species and trees and flowers, everything from their Latin names to their definitions to their origins to
where they're found and not.
Exactly. Did you realize that you had a gift, or did you think that was something that all human beings possessed in terms of skill sets?
I realized I had a gift, and there was only one person in my young years in my single-digit age range that encouraged me, and that was my Sunday school teacher.
And who's that?
Her name was Miss Sale, spelled with a Y.
Miss Sales with a Y. Well, shout out to Miss Sales with a Y. And was she located in the Lower Mainland?
Yeah, United Church of Canada was my home-based church, my parents and I. And I remember when I was a little boy, my parents, they made me go to Sunday school. And I did not like the idea of going to Sunday school because I went to school 5 days of the week. But I realize now why they insisted on it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it's been a big part of my life. And she really encouraged me to go for my dreams and goals. And she didn't know much about those two hobbies, but she said, you got to give it your best.
Oh, that's great encouragement. And isn't it funny how, I always look at the autobiography of Howard Schultz with Starbucks, the CEO and founder, where he had so many individuals and other business people and banks and investors telling him that his idea was inconceivable, where he wanted to create these cafes in North America that people would actually come, sit down at, enjoy coffee and stay. And every single person he told this idea to said, everyone takes their coffee to go, and nobody's going to pay more than 50 cents for a coffee. But he was denied 142 consecutive times from investors when he wanted to launch Starbucks. But he never gave up on that dream. He kept on persevering, and we all know where Starbucks is today.
Oh, yes.
But it exemplifies that you have to believe in yourself no matter what kind of external noise might come your way, especially when it's the naysayers that say it's not possible. Use that as motivation and encouragement instead of a detractor.
Well, some of my secrets of success, I've written my autobiography. It's my life story. I've called it the impossible dream because I heard that word impossible more than any other term given, and people often laughed at me. And I was going back to when I was a little boy. I had these big ideas, and it didn't sit well. Even my school teachers thought, "You got to be kidding! I could hardly spell or do arithmetic." And I want to do something that I like to do.
Absolutely, and you sure did, because you created one of the most magical, elaborate, and visually stunning botanical parks, not just in the region, not just in the province, not just in the country, but in the world, in the entire world. And you did that on a janitor's salary.
On a janitor's salary, yes.
With your own two hands and your own knowledge. How did that come to be in between you living in Cultus Lake in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia and then moving up north? What was the reason for moving up north to Prince George?
Well, that's a question people ask me sometimes. My answer's always been the same. I just wanted to get away from big city life. Vancouver is a great city, and it's got beautiful mountains and that. But growing up there, in my way of putting it, even back in the 60s, 70s, before moving up here, in ways it was a rat race. And I wanted to get away with that, and having a close bond with nature. you'd have to travel at least 70, 80 miles out of Vancouver to find a forest recreation site. But here in Prince George, some of them are less than 20, 25 miles away, with open highway in between till you get to the gravel roads.
Goodsir Nature Park included. I mean, it's
Yes.
what, 25 minutes north of Prince George?
It's about a half hour. It's 20 miles or 32 clicks. It's located in Salmon Valley, Prince George, north of Prince George, on the just off the John Hart Peace River Highway.
So, do you remember solidifying the decision to move up north? Was it just a moment where you said, I'm going to make this happen, and you just went with it? Or what kind of evolved in order for you to actually go through with the move up north?
Well, I had traveled across the country, and I had this idea back then. I'm not going to live in the Vancouver area for the rest of my life. I like nature. I love nature, and so on. So I made a list of some of the places that I've been to, and that I'd want to live someday. And I narrowed it down to 3 places. Number 3 on the list was Kenora, Ontario, because of the unique Lake of the Woods area and the rocky rolling hills and big and small lakes alike. And there's Lake Nipigon, and it was wild country. And my second choice was Whitehorse. After bouncing up that Alaska highway in the early 70s, it was, they weren't kidding when they said it was rough. And you could buy souvenirs. Here's mud in your eye. And the famous Alaska highway before it was paved. And Whitehorse was beautiful, and the surrounding area. And then there was Prince George. I had to go through Prince George to get to Whitehorse. This was in 1969, 1970, when I first came to Prince George, still living in Burnaby, outside of Vancouver. And I fell in love with the area here, and the backwoods, and I found it was very similar to Kenora area. The backwoods lakes, and some of the tree species were even the same. And I thought, well, if I ever had the choice to go somewhere, I would choose Prince George. And I lived that dream also. It was 3 or 4 years later, I ended up quitting a janitor's job. I worked at SFU in Burnaby for 4 years on the graveyard shift, and I came up to Prince George. My first job here was with the school board as a custodian, spare board, I believe they called it back then.
Well, Prince George community residents, as well as all the visitors to our city and the region, are very thankful that you followed through with that decision. Yeah. How did you end up in Salmon Valley?
Well, I've always had a magnetic pull, almost like a compass, to go north. And I remember it was actually 1967. My parents came up to Prince George, and that's when I actually saw it for the very first time on a Labor Day long weekend. 67, we had an extremely hot summer that year. And I talked to my mom and dad, can you go just a little bit further north? And I looked at the map, and there was Summit Lake. So Dad says yes. I was sitting in the back seat, looking at everything. Nothing escaped my eye. Getting into the fall season, all the beautiful colors, mostly yellows. And I further fell in love. I want to live in this area somewhere when the time is right. And sure enough, I settled in Salmon Valley, where I've been for about the last 34 years now.
And this all makes sense to me because you arrived in that region in autumn. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of listeners and viewers will agree that there is no place that's more beautiful than northern British Columbia than during the autumn months, with a million different tree colors throughout the region. It is the epitome of gorgeousness. It really is.
Yes, it is a sparse population compared to other parts of the country. And recreation sites, backwoods roads. I just love to get lost on, not literally lost, but always looking for new plant species. I found some rare species in this area too over the years. I've photographed, documented, and pressed them all. Whenever I'd find something, I wouldn't move till I did what I would do and then carry on to the next site.
So once you settled in Summit Lake, Salmon Valley area, and there's a lot of history there with the watershed divide of the Arctic and Pacific
Yes.
Oceans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And did you know right then and there, which would have been 30 plus years ago, that you wanted to create this world-class botanical park and music museum that would attract visitors from across the world?
It has. I had that idea when I was a little boy, when I was about 14 years old. And I remember my dad was the first to know. And I said, Dad, when I grow up someday, I want to buy some land. And I explained what I wanted to do, travel the country, document plant findings. And I'll never forget the look on his face. He didn't disbelieve me, but he put his hand on his hip like this and said, sure, son. He never lived to see that happen, but my mom did.
Well, if your dad was still here today, I'm confident he would be extraordinarily proud of everything you've accomplished and the human being you are, because we as a community sure are.
Yeah. And another part of that was I also told him if I ever do what I want to do with the land, I'm going to name it after my grandfather's mountain, which is Mount Goodsir. I believe it's the 5th highest peak in Canada. I was named after my late grandfather. He was stationed at Golden, road superintendent for the CPR, and everybody that knew him and loved him, he was always respected. He was always known as the boss back in those days. This is in the 1890s, into the turn of the second last century, and they named an unnamed peak after him, Mount Goodsir, and it's located in Yoho National Park, not far from Golden.
Here's something that I want our listeners to realize. You have never been on the internet before, correct?
No, I don't even own a computer. I still do things the old-fashioned way, and I love my rotary dial phone.
And you don't have a cell phone? You've never had a smartphone?
Never. No, I love my turntable and my cassette tapes too.
You see, there's a reason. There's a direct correlation why you are the happiest person I know. And I feel like it's because you've never been exposed to social media or the internet or carry a smartphone on you at your hip at all times. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's really, when I talk to you, it's so refreshing because I'm 36. I was born in 1984. Mm-hmm. And so like Andrew, who's here with us, we got to live in a generation that experienced life before the internet as well as subsequent to it. Mm-hmm. And you're one of the few humans remaining out there, especially in Canada, that have never been on the internet. And you have no desire to do that, right?
No, I guess you might say I'm the last of the of a dying breed, or I'm happy with analog. Especially electronics. Me and computers don't mix. A computer wants to do one thing, and I want to do the next. And I've had experience with an amplifier. You got to go all through this computer riffraff just to turn the volume up or adjust the bass, treble, balance. I have one of my amps at home is a 1970s Pioneer amp. It's a high performance 200 watt amp. In half a second, there's the bass, there's the treble. No wrong buttons to push. And if I do push the wrong button, I just simply push it again and it resets.
Well, you're also blessed with this gift where you have a photographic memory.
I have both a photographic memory and an audio playback memory. That is a gift I was born with.
I've never heard the term audio playback memory. So in terms of when you hear a certain segment of a song or even in its entirety, you can just right away remember those lyrics?
Yes, and even people's voices. Birds, especially songbirds at sunrise. I love that sound. And anything to do with sound as well.
That is exceptional. So let's just test your memory real quick. Name a song that came out in 1974.
1974, back when Turner Road Drive, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet. It came out on Mercury Records on a 45, and it was on one of their Mercury albums as well. And Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman originally played for the Guess Who, an earlier band, and I believe both bands originated in Winnipeg.
Wow. I don't even think Google could give me a quicker answer than that. Let's go with 1988.
1988, Bobby McMurphy, Don't Worry, Be Happy. That's a very, very inspiring song. Kind of a goofy sound to it, but because of the lyric content, it hit #1. It came out on Manhattan Records.
Manhattan
It
Records.
was near the end of the vinyl era.
Yeah. Well, let's go subsequent to the vinyl area and go 1991.
1991, that was past the vinyl era. Kix Country had emerged. Country music exploded in popularity in the early 90s, equally competing with pop music. And line dancing was created. Hillbilly Rock with Marty Stewart on Columbia tapes, cassette tapes. Achy Breaky Hearts by Billy Ray Cyrus. Those were two of the biggest songs that launched the Kix Country era in country music.
Have you ever listened to any of Billy Ray Cyrus's daughter's music, Miley Cyrus?
No, I haven't, no.
She's a little wild, a little out there. Yeah. Maybe one day she'll do a cover of Achy Breaky Heart and we'll introduce it to you. So if you had to say some of your favorite songs of all time and maybe just a top 3 list, what kind of songs would be on there?
I've always loved the saxophone in music, and the saxophone was the hottest instrument music in my early years. Just about any record that made it big at some point in the song had a saxophone in it. At the beginning, near the end, or during the instrumental solo, about 2/3 of the way through, including Elvis. Many of his old records have saxophones in it. Elvis, as many people know, was the king of rock and roll, but he also loved ballads too, and he did many ballads and gospel music. Another artist like Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash had country crossover records. Crossover records don't exist today, but Johnny Cash, I believe, had more crossover records than anyone else in his time. And a crossover record is a record at the time of its release. It did well on both the country chart and the pop chart at the same time, often reaching #1.
And Johnny Cash's music is just so real and powerful and raw. You could tell as an artist and as a human being, he's been through a lot, and a lot of that comes out in his music and in his lyrics. And you named your dog after Johnny Cash.
Yes, we adopted him, and he came with that name. It's just a coincidence, but he's my park assistant now. When he greets people when they come down the driveway, I always make it a point to go out and greet people. And my health hasn't been the best this last few years, but I still have a way of mind over matter, and I go out and I greet people, and Cash is almost always with me, and I say, "This is my assistant, Cash, and if I'm not here to greet you, he does it for me. And if I can't do tours down the trails, botanical tours, he's a great trail dog. He can't do the tour, or he can't tell the plants, but he can do the tours. He knows all the trails."
Absolutely. He's joined us for a few of our tours. And going back to the park and for your love of music and botany, you've collected, and correct me if I'm wrong, over 35,000 records over the last 3 or 4 decades?
Over the last 6 decades.
6 decades.
Yeah, 6 decades.
35,000 plus records.
Yes. And those 35,000 plus records, about 70% of them are 45s. To me, the 45s were the originals. And back in those years, you go into a studio, record 2 songs for A, side B of a 45. If the record did well, you go back into the studio and record about 10 more songs for an album. And then the record companies would release the best and often the worst on the flip side of whatever was on that album.
Extraordinary. And you have all these albums that you've accumulated over the years, all in a music museum located at the park?
There's 2 museums in the park. The first one is the Goodsir Botanical Museum. It has thousands of press samples of all my findings. Some of them go way, way back in my early years. From all over Canada, every province and territory is represented in the Goodsir Botanical Museum. And I do tours through there. And the other museum, I opened about 5 years ago, the J.L. Good record or vinyl, if you wish, museum. And this museum is time traveling back into the golden years, the golden age of vinyl, back when I believe life was a lot easier and the dollar went a lot further. And those are parts of my success too.
And speaking about the dollars, this park, the creation of Goodsir Nature Park, was all from your own money, time, and resources.
I was denied any grant or sponsor, and in part because people thought my idea was crazy. And I had no support, no volunteer help. I've got volunteer help today because of my health condition, but I created the park totally on my own. And I was always singing a song or something in the back of my mind pertaining to music at the time. I was developing the park in its early years. And the park, it's non-profit. It's park entry is by donation.
And that's a critically imperative part of your operation. And maybe some people don't realize is that you are not a registered charity,
No.
but you are essentially nonprofit, because I know that every single dollar, every single donation that you receive, you put it right back into the park.
In some way, the park maintenance, the trails, it's a huge undertaking. The park has 2 miles of trail, literally hundreds of botanical displays. It's got map ranges of Canada where the tree or plant is found in the wild. Plus, I have one of my own photos, a habitat picture taken on site, on location, and it's labeled as to when and where it was taken, as well as a few basic other things like the common name, the Latin name, and just a few things about its habitat, anything like that. And a person could spend all day just in the park alone reading these interpretive signs beside the actual living tree or plant.
And there are few destinations in this world where you can go and get exercise by touring the park, and you can visit the lake, and you can also educate yourself and your family. And that's why I love bringing my daughter to your park, because of all the interpretive signs. You can walk throughout these beautiful, beautiful areas, natural areas that also have your life's work, because you literally spent more than 3 decades driving across Canada, all of our provinces, all 3 territories, collecting plant and flower and rocks and you name it, all kinds of species from across the nation, and bringing them back and planting them at Goodsir Nature Park.
Yes, yeah. Goodsir focuses on education more than anything else. I on my programs, when I do go down the trails, I just don't stop and point out this is a Douglas fir and then go on to the next. Every plant I point out, I tell them something about it. Just like when I go through the second museum, every artist or group, I tell them something about how they got started or what their biggest hit was. So it's the same format in these 2 very different topics.
Well, I'm very curious to know how your mind works. If you were to walk by, say, a lodgepole pine, can you immediately visualize in your mind where in the country that you collected that, what year, how old you were, of what might have been happening in your life when you collected it, the drive back, the scenery around where you found the origin of that species? Can you just visualize all of that?
Yes, I can. Just isolating lodgepole pine from any other native Canadian tree, it brings back a lot of memories. Going to Manning Park, there's a very coast variety of lodgepole pine called the West Coast Shore Pine, and I believe they're 2 different species closely related. Some books have them as subspecies of each other. Same with the Douglas and the interior blue Douglas fir. But the lodgepole pine, I noticed it on the Alaska Highway. Lodgepole pine was everywhere, along with black spruce and white spruce, and the occasional tamarack. I can't remember what I wrote a poem about trees. I can't remember what I wrote about lodgepole pine, but it describes that part of the country.
Nice.
Lodgepole pine, with its needles dark green, covers mile after mile of forest unseen. And I was referring to the Alaska Highway.
Well, that's beautiful. And I know that you presented me with something this morning. I actually have the piece of paper right here. And what you would love to do is create some customized Goodsir Nature Park ballpoint pens.
Ballpoint pens,
Maybe
yes.
explain the concept that you're visualizing.
Well, it covers two subjects. One is about what the park has to offer. One of them, let's see. What's the first one there?
What you were mentioning is that you wanted quotes on all of these pens, and I have the first quote here: explore all the Canadian forest regions, first of its kind in Canada.
That is very, very true. Yes, that would be on one of the pens. Except for I have a total of 12 messages on two subjects. 10 out of the 12 are my own actual wordings. And the other subject is for everyday living. Love your neighbor as yourself. Any job that's worth doing is worth doing right. And walk that extra mile and you will have great success. That's something I've lived by. Whether it be a janitor job or going out and getting my hands dirty type job in the bush.
And you've never been afraid to get your hands dirty.
Never been afraid to get my hands dirty, no.
What's remarkable about your story is that you've never received provincial grants, federal funding, any kind of major assistance to help you with your dream. You did it with your own two hands, as well as your own finances and resources. And it was up until about a year and a half ago in 2019 when the park was celebrating its 30th anniversary, where you reached out to John Brink.
Yes.
And you asked him if perhaps you could buy some lumber, I believe 2 feet in
length. He had all those mountains of lumber, and I wanted to make some trail signs, and I forget what else I mentioned, but one of them was to update some of the signs, because some of them, they've been there upwards of 30 years, and they start rotting and falling over. So it was just a matter of repairing some of them, and that's how it all started.
Yeah, and I remember John came into my office and he mentioned, because I hadn't met you before this, and so this would have been either late 2018 or early 2019, and he was awestruck. He just said, I met this gentleman, Jim Good, and he's the founder of Goodsir Nature Park, and we have to go out there and see this park. The way he was describing it sounds just like a fantastic oasis of botany. And it was then that he made the decision, saying, like, anything Jim wants, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it for free. And that's where we really got to know you, and we're able to see you celebrate a magnificent milestone in the 30th anniversary of your park.
Well, up till that point, I'd never had a sponsor. I go in. In my earlier years in Prince George, I would go to different, like the pulp mills and people associated with forestry, but not just forestry. I'd go to other places. I heard they would do things for charities and that, and I introduced myself. I often showed them something I did, but it never fizzed on them at all. I was rejected each and every time. But people that rejected me don't know the hidden gem that they actually encouraged me to keep going and to put that much more into it. Sooner or later, I will succeed, and I have.
Well, you really are the personification of perseverance, and when I think about your story, I think about another great friend of mine, and that's Jim Tyrion. And Jim has raised over $800,000 for the Terry Fox Foundation since 1991. And before that, he walked across Canada in memory of his hero, Terry Fox. And despite having a hearing disability, and many people articulating to him that it wouldn't be possible, like you, he used these naysayers as motivation to follow through with his goal.
Yes.
And there's Jim Tyrion and yourself, Jim Good, both Prince George residents, both living on a janitorial salary, and both pursuing their dream relentlessly. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, I know him quite well. We used to work together at the hospital, and I'm not sure, I believe he's still there too. I retired 5.5 years ago, and now I'm full-time out at the park.
Yeah. Tell us about some of your journeys, traveling across Canada in the territories and the provinces throughout the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and collecting all these tree and plant species. Is there anything that comes to mind in terms of these adventures that just stand out?
Oh, there's so many. I can barely narrow it down to one. But I've trained myself. In a comic sense, I've got one eye on the road and the other eye in the bush looking for something rare or unusual. When I gradually go into a different forest zone, I see a brand new tree species. I stop right away if it's safe to stop along the side of the road. This is main highways. And I document all my findings in that. And then I go on to the next. And I remember one time coming back from across Canada in 1969. I stayed just off of a main highway. I can't remember where now. It was southern Saskatchewan. And there was a lot of snow. Fell about 5 or 6 inches of really wet Vancouver type snow. And I had so much weight in the back of my car, and I knew I could never get out of the snow. The roads weren't plowed. It snowed overnight. I was in this campsite all alone, and I didn't have very good tires. They were going bald, according to my dad when I got home. But I had a 61 Plymouth Belvedere, push-button automatic, and I had taken the back seat out, and I had kitchen shelves on one side, and I had a bed. It was 2 feet wide, 6 feet long, and it came the foot of the bed, and I still had about a foot in between that and the back bumper of the car. It's a full-size car, very reliable. And I had so many plants and trees in the car. The back bumper was just a matter of inches. I forget, maybe 6 or 8 inches from the road. You could tell there was a lot of weight in that car, and the front end was almost like up in the air a bit because of the misbalance. And that all that weight got me out of there through that 5 or 6 inches of very wet snow, and with bald tires. Winter tires, but they were bald or near bald, and I credit the weight. And I got pictures of when I arrived home. I was on the road for about 3 months. This was summer into fall 1969, and I remember my dad. He couldn't believe what the car looked like, and he looked at my tires. He says, "You need some new tires." He pointed out that the canvas was starting to show. They were 2-ply tires. They don't make 2-plies anymore, but these were 2-ply tires.
Yeah.
So that's what one thing that really stands out.
Well, you made it back.
Yeah, I made it
and that's
back.
what counts.
And in one piece, too.
And when you're on the road, it must have been very liberating for you to put on some music, another passion of yours, and to listen to some tunes when you're cruising throughout different Canadian highways.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're working in your janitorial role, would you get 2 weeks off per year?
2 weeks off per year. I got a little more time off when I was working at the hospital. And I've dedicated all my holidays to what I love to do. I've never gone and sat for 2 weeks on some southern shore or beach, as much as it would be nice, but not me. I'm out in the bush doing what I love to do. When I go an amazing long distance return in 2 weeks, sometimes 4,000 miles return inside of 2 weeks to be back to a job. And then when I worked at the hospital, I think I had 3, 4, just short of 5 weeks towards the end of my working career as a janitor.
And you would dedicate the entirety of that time off to traveling across country and collecting all these tree and plant species.
Yes. And I dedicated even weekends and long weekends. Long weekends back, in the 70s, well into the 80s, I would go down in the Okanagan and back in 3 days. In the May long weekend or Easter, and it was just getting out of the snow too. I'd go down, I'd see desert plants starting to come out, the prong-leafed Indian paintbrush, and so on. Which we're about a month behind the Okanagan and Vancouver with the arrival of spring here. And that's just one example.
Well, there's not too many people on this planet that have seen more of the country of Canada than you, because you every year would be traveling across Canada. Like, how many people have actually driven from British Columbia to Newfoundland?
Newfoundland, including Labrador and Prince Edward Island.
Yeah, and back.
And back.
And every year.
Yeah.
It's truly incredible that you got to see that substantial amount of our country with your own eyes, and our territories too. And do you, when you look back at all the time you spent on the road, is there any stretches of highways or areas that really stand out that you enjoyed?
People ask me that question. I got about a dozen different places I would call spectacular. The Cabot Trail, the Jasper Banff Highway, or a couple of them. But what is my most favorite part of the country? And I would have to say the Dempster Highway, which starts at Dawson City in the northern Yukon, near Dawson City, branches off the Klondike Highway. It's 500 miles long from where it begins to Inuvik in the Northwest Territories, and it's Canada's only year-round Arctic highway. And you pass through the Arctic Desert, and
You say Arctic
there's
desert?
an Arctic, yeah.
That sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah, there's actually 4 deserts in Canada that I know of. The Arctic Desert in the northern Yukon, I believe it's the Richardson Mountains, and the other 3 deserts, the Prairie Badlands and southern BC, and there's an isolated desert in the Yukon called the Carcross Desert, which is recognized as the smallest desert in the world, and that's south of Whitehorse.
Wow, south of Whitehorse.
Yeah.
So when you're in the Yukon, did you also visit Watson Lake?
Yes, Watson Lake.
Because that's close to the border of the Yukon and British Columbia.
Yeah, Watson Lake, both the town and the city, it's the first settlement. It's recognized as a city that you go through when you cross into the Yukon. The Alaska Highway goes back and forth. It straddles the 60th parallel. And apparently you cross into the Yukon and back into BC, I believe 8 or 9 times before it actually goes to the Yukon. And that's when you see the welcome sign, welcome to Yukon.
What are some other memories that you have of the territories of Canada?
I remember my daughter, she was 11 years old, Maureen, and I said, do you want to go somewhere where the sun never sets? And she looked at me and says, sure, Dad, just like my dad said to me one time, sure, Dad. And I explained about it, and she didn't believe me, but we went up to Inuvik, and I remember we were camping in there's an igloo church up there. I believe it's a Catholic church, and they had a parking lot. We stayed in the parking lot overnight, and at 2:30 in the morning, we went for a little walk, and you couldn't tell whether it was 2:30 in the morning or 2:30 in the afternoon. People were walking around in short sleeve shirts on the wooden sidewalks of Inuvik, and it was that was really fascinating. And of course, seeing trees up there like the Alaska white birch, the Mackenzie Indian paintbrush, and Arctic black spruce, those were all trees that I checked out while in the Inuvik area.
Were you able to collect some of those trees and bring them back to the Prince George
I do
region?
have some of them growing in the park. Yeah.
And how have they performed in this northern climate? I guess it's southern compared to where they originate.
This is almost tropical compared to the harsh winters of the far north. Most of them do very, very well. Climate change has played a role in Goodsir like everywhere else. Rainforest trees don't do very well in a Prince George climate. But with warming winters, I found like the Sitka spruce, the western hemlock, western red cedar, the giant Coast Douglas fir, they frostbite less each year, but we've had the last few years we've had colder winters, and I believe it was last year for the first time in a long time it actually topped 40 below Fahrenheit. And above the snow pack they were frostbitten, but they didn't die. So these things I noticed right away. They're insulated. The needles are insulated in the snow. because it's not so much the temperature, it's the wind chill factor that actually causes the frostbite of these trees.
Well, your memory always amazes me of how really crisp and specific it is. That is really a gift that you have, Jim. I want to talk about the future sustainability of Goodsir Nature Park. And there's an idea that I presented to you a while back where you recently had some serious health concerns.
Yes.
So was it a quadruple open heart bypass surgery?
Quadruple bypass at St. Paul's Hospital, Vancouver, yes.
Yeah, then it was at that time where you started talking about longevity and sustainability of the park and how instrumental that is to you in terms of just making sure Goodsir Nature Park lives on. And it's important to not just you, but a lot of people in this community and region that want to see the preservation of Goodsir Nature Park. One idea that came to mind, and I was visiting San Francisco about a decade ago, and Alcatraz has this amazing tour without guides. What they do is they have an audiobook tour, and you put in the audiobook, and nowadays you probably just download it on an app on your phone. But what it allowed you to do was do a self tour, and it would be narrated by an individual, and you just walk throughout the cells, and they'd be telling you where Al Capone once was, and certain history with each cell and Alcatraz as a whole. But I thought, how phenomenal would that be to have something narrated by you, Jim Good, at Goodsir Nature Park that could live on forever? So somebody could arrive to the park and open up an app on their phone, or maybe go to your website, and this self-guided tour, narrated tour with your voice comes on, and they can walk through the miles and miles and miles of your beautiful park with all the signage and the information, and you could provide them with that tour. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Yes, yeah. Goodsir Nature Park is my gift to Canada. And I know that the trees I planted, some of them could live hundreds of years if they're protected from both the natural and man-made elements. The ones like Ponderosa Pine, I believe at Goodsir, they do very well. It's a tree from the Okanagan. It has the longest needles of any tree in Canada, and they can live up to 400 years, and these ones are doing incredibly well. And I've got another tree, the limber pine from southern Alberta, from the foothills. It could live 600-700 years, and they've been known to live over 1,000 years in the wild. And some of the coast species, if they don't get too much frostbite, they may live a long life too. Those are just a few examples.
Yeah, well, that's just amazing to hear. And I know that City Council, Mayor Lynn Hall and his council colleagues recognized you for all the work that you've done in 2019. And I remember our friend Claire was there as well. And I want to give a shout out to Claire and her husband, because I know that they did a lot of great work.
They did a lot
as well, right? And they're just very caring people that they love you as a person, and they love Goodsir Nature Park and what it stands for and what it provides our community citizens and visitors with is just an educational botanical experience. And it really doesn't feel like you're in Salmon Valley. It feels like once you get to Goodsir Nature Park, you're taken away to this magical place, and it's very hard to describe how uplifted you feel after touring Goodsir Nature Park. It's a reason why I love bringing my daughter there, and I love bringing my girlfriend there, and I love bringing my family there, because when we're there, it's an escape from reality in a lot of ways. You just feel so great exploring Canada's history in one designated spot. Nothing in the world exists like Goodsir Nature Park, and that's because of you, Jim. What you've done is really not just a gift to this community, but a gift to Canada and a gift to anyone who's visiting this region. And if there's any opportunity for this podcast to reach some people in Ottawa, or to reach some people that can really help with the preservation of this park, I mean, please reach out, because it's so important to this country, not just this community, this country, the preservation of the wonderful work you created, Jim.
I took a long shot. I didn't succeed, but I tried. I was hoping and praying. The one person I wanted to come to the 30th was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And one of his, I've been in contact more than once with his office, and one person once told me he's been following Goodsir online. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I was told.
And you received a letter from from
I
his
did
office?
receive a congrats letter from his office for the 30th anniversary, but he said he couldn't make it because he still got so many other things. But I got that letter framed as well, and I'd had letters from Shirley Bond and Bob Zimmer, and
Both great supporters.
Marilyn Hall
Yeah.
from Prince George, and
But with Trudeau, the excuse of he has too many things on the go, that doesn't cut it. Because honestly, like, your park is world class and nothing like it exists in the country.
No.
So whoever it is, whether it's Trudeau or his successor, whoever the prime minister is, they need to be here in person to see it. And maybe now is not the time with COVID travel and restrictions, but in the future, whether it's 2022 or 2023, we need this kind of national representation to come out and not just see your park, but enjoy it. Because once they're there, they're going to be filled with all these emotions they've never felt before. And that moment is when they're going to realize that they need to step in and help in any regard that they can, with funding or anything to help with the preservation of the park.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got a few projects ongoing. If I ever had the funding someday to replace all the interpretive signs, some of them are starting to wear out and they're falling over and they're just rotting away. Every year I have to go straighten them up after winter. And another goal, my heart goes out to people that have disabilities like wheelchairs, walkers, and that. They come and they can't walk the trails. Although I've had the odd wheelchair pushed down the short loop. It's a bumpy ride, but it is accessible. And it's my goal someday to have the trails either paved over or like the ones at Cottonwood Park in Prince George.
Yeah, Cottonwood Park, and they also did a phenomenal job of accessibility at the ancient forest. And we've actually been talking to Rick Hansen and his publicist Don, bringing him on a guest on this podcast. And it's something that I'd like to talk to him about in terms of maybe grants out there for accessibility, wheelchair access at the park, because I think that would be just a great addition to Goodsir Nature Park.
Well, yeah, and it'd also benefit young mothers with small kids with strollers. And that. And anybody with a disability, because my heart goes out to people and they come, they can't walk the trails, and we've had the last couple of years we've had very wet summers, and people come out with running shoes expecting to walk the trails, and because of the at the beginning and at the very end, the low section is flooded with water in July and August. And
another person we could talk to is Roll and Mix Concrete. I know they do a lot of phenomenal work in this community. They really like to give back, John Palucci. So, that might be an opportunity to ask if there could be any assistance from there, and maybe even if it's at a discounted price, where we can work with a local organization like that. And maybe there's some grant funding opportunities there, because I agree with you for the accessibility and just the overall enjoyment of the park for young mothers or individuals that might be in a wheelchair or pushing a stroller. It makes the park that much more inclusive.
Well, Goodsir doesn't fall. It doesn't seem to my knowledge and what I've observed over the years, doesn't fall into any category for grants or even sponsors, except for John. And I thank him dearly for his contribution, because it's one of a kind. I don't think I may be wrong, but I don't know if the government is ready for a place like Goodsir, because there's nothing available. And I've heard of other places they get grants and that, and they get sponsorship, but I just keep plugging away, and I love it.
You know more than anybody that just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean it's not achievable.
Yes.
So, Jim, how can somebody get in touch with you if they want to help? Because I know you're always looking for volunteers. You're always looking for funding. I know you're very, very humble, and you don't really like to ask for donations.
Like throwing hints even.
Yeah, but it's what you rely on for your livelihood, and it's what the park relies on. And so how can people help?
Well, I don't own a computer, but I've got two websites, so I've been told. And I believe both websites, or at least one of them, has a mention of volunteer help. People can phone the park. It's my home phone number, 250-971-2337. That's in Salmon Valley, Prince George, BC. And or else just come out. I get people that come out as visitors, and I've got a sign at the entrance of the park saying volunteer help needed, and they sometimes ask me about that. And I've had some very, very loyal people come out, and I'm so grateful for them coming out. They put aside their own work and their own time to come out and to help out, whether it's trail maintenance, hauling, or splitting firewood. Our wood is heated by wood. I don't have the strength anymore to go out into the bush, and I used to scrounge all the firewood from the park, taking down dead or dying trees, local trees, bringing them back and using them as firewood. So it cleans the park and gives us free heat. But those days are in the past now. I have to rely on buying firewood and then hopefully to get some people to help split it up and that. And I've had some very wonderful people out there that have come out.
Well, it's great. And, you know, like the old saying goes, or, you know, I might even be completely making this up, but wonderful people want to help wonderful people.
Yes.
And I really feel like you are the vaquita of a human being, and that is the rarest mammal on the entire planet, the most endangered. I think there's less than 10 of the vaquita species still alive today, and it's just an individual who right from the start of their life knew exactly what their passion was and pursued it vigorously. And the beneficiaries of your incredible work at Goodsir Nature Park are the visitors. It really is. And I know that with your health problems, it must be very hard for you to not be able to provide the park tours that you've done for over 3 decades. It must be very challenging for you to see certain things at the park that might be deteriorating, or it needs regular maintenance. It's a big, big park. It must be very hard for you not to be able to do that yourself anymore.
Yeah, that is true. That's very, very true. And I don't keep regular business hours or regular shop hours. I'm there most of the time to greet people. No one has ever been turned away from Goodsir, whether they come at 2:30 in the afternoon or on one or two rare cases, 2:30 in the morning, looking for a campsite. I have 3 campsites for overnight use. They've been recently upgraded by YRB, and it's by donation, as well as to come out for a day overnight camping is by donation. It includes firewood, and if you have an RV, it even includes an electric plug-in for your computer.
And this is what's so great, is just the joy in your face when you talk about this, is that it really does provide you with unlimited amounts of happiness when you see people enjoying the park, and whether it's camping or exploring your 2 museums or just touring the park. Like, that's the greatest joy that you could receive.
In the guest register, I have never had a negative comment on the park. It's always been commented, always been uplifting, and it inspires me. And I do know one thing: the happiest people on this earth, I truly believe with all my heart, that are people that give more than they receive. Whether it's helping out or donating, whether it's donating to a recognized charity, or whether it's volunteer help, they're giving, period. And what I'm doing, I'd love to be able to give, but because of my status being a janitor and that, and pumping everything I had into my lifelong dream, I'm hoping someday, and it's to maybe give some of that back. But for now, Goodsir serves its purpose on education. Not only that, bringing people together, both near and far, whether it's somebody from around the world or the neighbor down the road. Everybody that comes to Goodsir is treated equally, without exception. Even if they don't donate, they're still treated. They get that warm, old-fashioned. Right now, it's the COVID handshake, but a normal handshake. I drum up a conversation. Hi, my name's Jim. I'm the park host. I try not to say the park developer. I did it first, but I just try to limit it to park host. And I start asking where they're from, and and I give them a park map, and hopefully someday a Covenant ballpoint pen from the park will go with that. That's included in the donation as well.
And we're going to make that happen, Jim. I'll promise you that. So with those words of wisdom that you just articulated and provided us with, we're going to wrap up this podcast.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being a guest on Crazy Damn Canadians. It's been an absolute honor to have you here, and I hope that people will listen to this episode and want to make contributions towards yourself and Goodsir Nature Park.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure being here.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Air high five.
High five. Okay. The COVID side.
There we go. Nice. Thanks, Jim.
Okay.